In America, if you don't like the other side, you don't negotiate with them, you try to overthrow them, preferably covertly. If it doesn't work covertly, you do it overtly. You always say it's not our fault. They're the aggressor. They're the other side. They're Hitler. That comes up every 2 or 3 years. Whether it's Saddam Hussein, whether it's Assad, whether it's Putin, that's very convenient. That's the only foreign policy explanation the American people are ever given anywhere. Now, when the Maidan occurred, I was called immediately. Oh, Professor Sachs, the new Ukrainian prime minister would like to see you to talk about the economic crisis, because I'm pretty good at that. And so I flew to Kiev and I was walked around the Maidan and I was told how the U.S. paid the money for all the people around the Maidan. Spontaneous revolution of dignity. Ladies and gentlemen, please, where do all these media outlets come from? Where does all this organization come from? Where do all these buses come from? Where do all these people called in come from? Are you kidding? This is organized effort. And it's not a secret, except to citizens of Europe and the United States. Everyone else understands it quite clearly. Now, in 2014, the U.S. worked actively to overthrow Yanukovych. Everybody knows the phone call intercepted by my Columbia University colleague, Victoria Nuland, and the U.S. Ambassador Peter Piot. You don't get better evidence. The Russians intercepted her call and they put it on the internet. Listen to it. It's fascinating. I know all these people. By the way, by doing that, they all got promoted in the Biden administration. That's the job. Then came Minsk, and especially Minsk II, which, by the way, was modeled on South Tyrolean autonomy. And the Belgians could have related to Minsk II very well. It said there should be autonomy for the Russian-speaking regions in the east of Ukraine. It was supported unanimously by the UN Security Council. Trump won, raised the armaments. There were many thousands of deaths in the shelling by Ukraine in the Donbass. There was no Minsk II agreement. And then Biden came into office. And again, I know all these people. I used to be a member of the Democratic Party. I now am strictly sworn to be a member of no party, because both are the same anyway, and because this is, the Democrats became complete wars over time, and there was not one voice about peace, just like most of your parliamentarians, the same way. The United States and Ukraine decided it was not to be enforced. Germany and France, which were the guarantors of the Normandy process, let it go. And it was absolutely another direct American unipolar action, with Europe, as usual, playing completely useless subsidiary role, even though it was a guarantor of the agreement. So at the end of 1991, Putin put on the table a last effort in 2 security agreement drafts, one with Europe and one with the United States. The U.S. put on the table December 15, 2021. I had an hour call with Jake Sullivan in the White House begging, Jake, avoid the war. You can avoid the war. All you have to do is say NATO will not enlarge to Ukraine. And he said to me, oh, NATO's not going to enlarge to Ukraine. Don't worry about it. I said, Jake, say it publicly. No, we can't say it publicly. I said, Jake, you're going to have a war over something that isn't even going to happen? He said, don't worry, Jeff, there will be no war. These are not very bright people. Lots of important things are now on offer and on the table, and I believe that the war will end quickly because of this, and this will be at least one blessing in a very, very difficult time. Exactly what the settlement will be, I think, is now only a question of the territorial issues. And that is whether it is the complete 4 oblasts, including all of Kherson and Zaporizhia, or whether it is on the contact line, and how all of this will be negotiated. I'm not in the room of the negotiation, so I can't really say more, but the basis will be there will be territorial concessions, there will be neutrality, there will be security guarantees for Ukraine, for all parties. There will be, at least with the U.S., an end of the economic sanctions. But what counts, of course, is Europe and Russia. I know the Russian leaders, many of them quite well. They are good negotiators, and you should negotiate with them, and you should negotiate well with them. I would ask them some questions. I would ask them, what are the security guarantees that can work so that this war ends permanently? What are the security guarantees for the Baltic states? What should be done? Part of the process of negotiation is actually to ask the other side about your concerns, not just to know what they know as you think is true, but actually to ask, we have a real problem. We have a real worry. What are the guarantees? Well, I want to know the answers also. By the way, I know Minister Lavrov, for 30 years. I regard him as a brilliant foreign minister. Talk with him, negotiate with him, get ideas, put ideas on the table, put counter ideas on the table. I don't think all of this can be settled by pure reason because of oneself. You settle wars by negotiating and understanding what are the real issues, and you don't call the other side a liar when they express their issues. You work out what the implications of that are for the mutual benefit of peace. I think that there are, and maybe there will be, a restoration of nuclear arms negotiations, which would be extraordinarily positive. I think that there are tremendously important issues for Europe to negotiate directly with Russia. And so I would urge President Costa and the leadership of Europe to open direct discussions with President Putin, because European security is on the table. I'll just make a couple complaints. First, Europe is not NATO, as I said. I thought Stoltenberg was the worst, but I was wrong. It just keeps getting worse. Could someone in NATO stop talking, for God's sake, about more war? And could NATO stop speaking for Europe, and Europe stop thinking it's NATO? This is the first absolute point. Second, I'm sorry, but your high representative vice presidents need to become diplomats. Of course, you don't yet have a constitution for Europe which really underpins a European foreign policy. And it can't be by unanimity. There has to be a structure in which Europe can speak as Europe, even with some dissent, but with a European policy. I don't want to oversimplify how to get there exactly, but even with the structures you have, you could do a lot better with negotiating directly. The first rule is your diplomats should be diplomats, not secretaries of war. A diplomat is a very special kind of talent. A diplomat is trained to sit together with the other side and to listen, to shake hands, to smile, and to be pleasant. It's very hard. It's a skill. It's training. It's a profession. It's not a game. You need that kind of diplomacy. I'm sorry, we are not hearing anything like that. Diplomacy means going to Moscow, inviting your Russian counterpart here discussing. This doesn't happen till now. Finlandization landed Finland #1 in the World Happiness Report year after year. Rich, successful, happy, and secure. That's pre-NATO. So Finlandization was a wonderful thing. #1 in the world. When Sweden and Finland and Austria were neutral. Bravo. Smart. When Ukraine was neutral, smart. If you have two superpowers, keep them apart a little bit. You don't have to be right with your nose up against each other, especially if one of them, the U.S., is pushing its nose into the other one. So Europe should be Europe with subsidiaries. Don't lose all of the wonderful, wonderful national and local elements. But Europe should be Europe. So the good side is I want Europe to have diplomacy, for example, with ASEAN. I spend a lot of time with the ASEAN countries. If the EU Green Deal, wonderful idea. I said many years ago, okay, to the ASEAN leaders, make an ASEAN Green Deal. And then talk with the Europeans so that you have this wonderful relationship, trade, investment, technology. So last year they announced an ASEAN Green Deal. What did Europe do about it? Nothing. It said, sorry, we're in the Ukraine war, thank you. No interest. So this is my point. The prospects are very positive if we construct the peace. And so Finlandization, to my mind, has a very positive connotation. So does Austrianization. Austria, 1955, signed its neutrality. The Soviet army left. And Austria is a wonderful place, by the way. Absolutely wonderful. And so this is basic how to avoid conflict. If the United States had any sense at all, it would have left these countries as a neutral space in between the U.S. military and Russia. But that's where the U.S. lost it. But the point I would really make is that Ukraine and Georgia were too far. This is right up against Russia. This is in the context of the complete destabilization of the nuclear framework. This is in the context of the U.S. putting in missile systems on Russia's borders. If you listen to President Putin over the years, probably the main thing, if you listen carefully, that he's concerned about is missiles 7 minutes from Moscow, is a decapitation strike. And this is very real. The U.S. not only would freak out, but did freak out when this happened in the Western Hemisphere. So it's the Cuban Missile Crisis in reverse. And fortunately, Nikita Khrushchev did not stand up and say, open door policy of the Warsaw Pact. We can go wherever we want. Cuba's asked us. It's none of America's business. What Khrushchev said is, war, my God, we don't want war. We end this crisis. We both pull back. That's what Khrushchev and Kennedy decided. So the most important thing is stop the yelling, stop the warmongering, and discuss with the Russian counterparts. And don't beg to be at the table with the United States. You don't need to be in the room with the United States. You're Europe. You should be in the room with Europe and Russia. If the United States wants to join, that's fine. But to beg, no. I have no doubt of why Hungary, Poland, Czech Republic, Slovakia wanted to join NATO. The question is, what is the U.S. doing to make peace? Because NATO is not a choice of Hungary, Poland, Czech Republic, or Slovakia. NATO is a U.S.-led military alliance. And the question is, how are we going to establish peace in a reliable way? And by the way, Europe does not need to have Ukraine in the room when Europe talks with Russia. You have a lot of issues, direct issues, don't hand over your foreign policy to anybody. Not to the United States, not to Ukraine, not to Israel. Keep a European foreign policy. This is the basic idea. If I were making those decisions back then, I would have ended NATO altogether in 1991. When those countries requested NATO, I would have explained to them what our Defense Secretary William Perry said, what our lead statesman George Kennan said, what our final ambassador to the Soviet Union, Jack Matlock, said. They said, well, we understand your feelings, but it's not a good idea because it could provoke a new Cold War with Russia. So that's how I would have answered it. When those countries joined in the first wave, I don't think it was that consequential, in fact, except that it was part of a bigger project. And the project was spelled out already in 1994. There's a very good book by Jonathan, Harvard University Press, called Hubris, which gives a detailed historical documentation of step by step what happened. And it's really worth reading. So this is the real consequential. Russia even swallowed with a lot of pain the Baltic states, Romania, Bulgaria, Slovakia, and Slovenia. It is Ukraine and Georgia. And it's because of geography. It's because of Lord Palmerston. It's because of the First Crimean War. It's because of the missile systems that this is the essence of why there was this war.